I've been following Marques Brownlee, or MKBHD's, way of using productivity apps for a couple of years now since he started talking about it on the Waveform podcast. And yesterday he released a video talking with Andrew about building a second brain, getting things done, paramethods, and all the stuff that I could talk for hours about. But Marques and the podcast guest David wanted to try and get Andrew out from using just their alarm app for anything they needed to do and promote a task or a calendar app of some sorts. And this is what Andrew said.
Like, what has kept you in the alarm app world all this time?
I'll be honest, it's stubbornness.
Okay.
It's not like, no, I don't think I'm running smoothly. I think if you had the opportunity to call my wife right now, she would be like, no, he does not do all the things that he says he will do or I ask him to do. So I'm consistently forgetting things. I mean, if it's super, super important, I will remember it, or it will be in the alarm app, and that's how I'll remember it.
And throughout this conversation, they go through loads of different details. I do have a question about Marques and his workflow with the apps he's using, but to bring it back and simplify it a little bit, I want to go through talking about calendar and task apps, so tasks and events, the productive moments of actually getting stuff done, and also planning to do things, how they plan or suggest a plan to do things. But this conversation is about apps, so what apps are they talking about? In this specific case, they use TickTick, Todoist, and actually Google Tasks as their three main task app suggestions, and then I assume Google Calendar is the one that they're using alongside Notion Calendar because they use Notion for their business. So Google Calendar plus Notion Calendar, sort of as a hybrid. I personally use Morgen, just for clarity. And I am going to state I am not paid by Morgen or sponsored by Morgen. I've used them for 3 years and I moderate their Discord. That's it. I just really like the tool, which is why I use it. So talking about calendars.
Man, I'm realizing my entire life's calendar is just texting my wife to see what we're doing this weekend.
Whoa. That's a different productivity app.
This is going to be her favorite pod. This might be the first episode she listens to.
This is good. This is all very good. Okay.
You're bringing that up. I want my personal calendar to be anything. Mm-hmm. I need that. I need that for myself, I think. That would be super important. I feel like, especially now with all of the hobbies that I have, and now also having a child, I need to be way more organized so I can find those time slots to when I can do the things that I love to do that are just me, or like meeting up with people. So
now hearing that made me laugh, but also remind me of when I was at university and figured out that actually a calendar is really useful. But I do want to extend this conversation a little bit further forwards and say a calendar can get really, really messy when you put everything on the calendar. I tried using Google Calendar at university and it worked, but it just became a mess. There were so many different events and colors and stuff on there, and I do recognize that when you look at my calendar now, Morgen, it looks like there's loads of stuff on here, but I can push a button. So say I push 3, it hides everything that I don't need to see, whereas Google Calendar doesn't give me this flexibility to just push a button and see everything I want to see or don't want to see. I'm just pushing different hotkeys here, so you can see all the different options I have. But it makes things really, really simple to turn things on and off. And for me, managing things in a calendar, the ability to turn things on or off or hide or show different events is really important when you're trying to look at things. Otherwise, it just gets messy. And in Morgen, it's called a calendar set. I believe Fantastical has it and BusyCal has that feature as well. But Google Calendar doesn't have it as a default setting. So Morgen does it for me, but as Marques says quite nicely,
the one downside that I find with to-do list apps is events don't really work as well as tasks.
Yep.
So then there's the calendar app stuff. There are lots of calendar apps. Lots of them have various plugins and UIs and things they can do. They all more or less look the same because a calendar is a calendar. Mm-hmm. But the way you're organizing, I need to take out the trash at a certain time. I will set an event so that I remember to do this thing at this time. You can also do it that way. And there's a bunch of calendar apps. And my issue with that is not every task that I do has a specific time that I'm going to be doing it. Okay. It's almost more like a hierarchy of things that I'll be doing during the day and not necessarily times.
And this is where the conversation gets interesting for me, at least. You've got tasks and events. You've got tasks where they don't have a time, a due date, or a scheduled date. It's just a thing you want to get done. And then events, which are typically time-bound. Now, with a calendar app, you can't have a thing that doesn't have a date because there's nowhere to show it on a calendar, which is where something like Google Calendar or Notion Calendar or any typical calendar app struggles, which is why why people have a task app. But then if you've got a task app, seeing the tasks on a time scheduled day, like a calendar, is either rare or the apps are trying to do that, but they're not quite there yet. So you have this, as Marquez will say in a minute, dichotomy between task apps and event or calendar apps.
This is, you and I have the same problem, which is I am constantly flitting between a to-do list app, which is very good for tasks and not very good for things that have to happen at a very specific time and often have other information associated with them, or a calendar, which is really great for that stuff. But for like a thing that I just need to remember to do sometime in the next couple of days, calendars are awful.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like, I feel like there's even the like, this needs to be done by the end of the day. This needs to be done by the end of the week. This just needs to be done whenever you're ready. And then like, this is this exact date on this calendar.
Right.
So
Yeah. Then there are the hybrids.
Yes.
There are some apps.
I hate how you understand everything he's saying. At one point, I want you to be like, "What are you talking about?" You're like,
The hybrids
"No."
caused me so much pain.
It's that meme of like he's thinking about other women. It's like the hybrid task apps. It's just
So there are apps that understand this dichotomy with tasks and events and will try to help you bring them both to one place. So Adam was trying Amy earlier. There are other apps like this where, and one of them that I'll suggest later kind of lets you drag tasks onto the calendar as you're going about your day to sort of move through things.
I feel like just by the way you're talking about this is I'm going to compare this to a 2-in-1 where it's just not as good as either of them.
That's basically right. I
Okay.
think that is basically right.
They mention Amy as a 2-in-1, Akiflow's another one, Morgen's another one, Motion does it as well. There's quite a few out there. Morgen's the one that I use. One, it's free to get started with, so it's really easy. And two, it's got loads of other features that I use, which I've explained before on the channel, which I'll link somewhere up there. But when Andrew says it's not quite as good as both, I would say I agree to an extent, because no, you can't do as much inside of the planner, 2-in-1 apps, whatever you want to call them, in tasks or in events. But if we try and simplify what we actually need to do, have a list of stuff and then schedule it, it doesn't have to be that complicated when you want to get stuff done. And for me, Morgen does that, and like I say, it's free to start with, and that's what I promote people to use. Just use it for free. Hook up your Google Calendar or your Outlook or whatever Linux calendar you're using with a CalDAV, because Morgen's one of those apps that actually lets you do that, and then start writing out your tasks. You don't need another app to put it somewhere else, so you don't need duplicated tasks or duplicated events outside of your main calendar. You can just go to one place, which for me saves time. But this is where the conversation starts shifting about when do you start doing these things, these tasks. Do you do the task when you feel like it and just leave it in the task list or today list, overdue list in the task app, or do you schedule it? How do you know when this productive moment is? So Andrew discusses this a bit.
Rather than leave it till the end of the weekend, it's more of I sit down and I figure everything I need to do, and then I wait till that moment that hits where I'm like, I'm productive right now. I feel productive. A lot of the times in the summer, that's like, I'm going to go mow the lawn. And then once I finish mowing the lawn, I'm like, I'm just in that mood where I'm going to get stuff done. And I usually find myself like getting everything done very quickly.
As far as you know.
Except for all the things you forgot to do, you didn't write it down.
You know, in a pessimistic world, maybe. In an optimistic world, Andrew's killing it. And he's ready for some Valorant.
I love this.
Yeah.
So to me, it sounds like Andrew's using the deadline or the, okay, you have to get this done now as almost a trigger to start doing things to have that productive moment, which comes back to the due date versus due date or scheduled date and all those different things, and whether you have a deadline or you don't have a deadline. But if you haven't scheduled anything into your calendar, or you don't have a list of tasks to do, or in Andrew's case, it's not on the alarm, then you won't get it done, at least until the last minute, and then you're just really productive because you're doing things. Now for me, I time block, but not necessarily strict time blocking. It's more like a school lesson session. It's like, hey, you've got maths now, go do maths. You go into the lesson, but you end up spending first half of the lesson talking to a friend, and the last half of the lesson you do all the work right at the end because you need to get it done, but it's done within that hour, and then the next hour is science or English or art or whatever. So I have a session planned out to do writing or editing, and I get stuff done, but I have enough flexibility to just not do the thing if I don't want to. to, or I don't feel like I want to. My blocks of time on the calendar are more like suggestions rather than rules. And that's partly because when I start doing something, I can think about something else I want to do and go in a different direction to where I potentially initially plan to go, which Andrew actually discusses.
I'm realizing when I say that I like get in these productivity like hours or moods or whatever, I also am very good at not just being like, I have to take everything out of my office and then I have to replace the sockets in the nursery and then I have to clean the downstairs. It is like I am halfway through getting the stuff out of my office, and then when I'm bringing some of that stuff to my room, I pass the nursery and I'm like, oh, I can replace one of those sockets. And then so there are lots of
so many listeners who are diagnosing you with various things as you explain this.
That's Dr. Mike's coming in next week to just finish that off. But but yes, there is definitely a level of me being pretty scatterbrained, which I think this will help. But just throwing it out there.
But you never run out of RAM.
Not that I know.
Like you're doing task 1 and then you pass by task 2 and then you go, oh, I just do task 2 and then you start doing task 2 and then you see task 3 needs being done and you start task 3. Do you ever get so far down the rabbit hole that you forgot about task 1 and you just need to just put it all down somewhere so you make sure you do all the things?
If you ask the open socket in the nursery, yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to avoid the philosophical side tangent of Marquez saying RAM there and assuming that the brain is like a computer. I don't think that's quite accurate with extended, embodied, enacted cognition and all that sort of fun stuff. But for me, there are two elements here. One of them is doing what it is that you want to do, so you're continuously acting in the environment that you're in. So if you see an affordance, i.e. a task that you should be doing or you want to go and do, you go and do it. Whether you put a constraint on that or not is depending on what task you see and the other time limits that you've set yourself. So if you do need to leave the house, you're not going to start and do a task that you know is going to take 2 hours. Most people won't do that because they won't perceive the affordance in the same way. But then that extends to the second part where you go so far away from the original task you started with, you forget or you can't stay on track with whatever it is that you were originally doing, which is where I would argue we want to have, some call it extended cognition, the second brain, some sort of external cue to help us keep on track. Now, whether that external is in tech or on a piece of paper or someone else telling you, I would say that that is embedded cognition, thinking with things outside of our environment, whether that is phone, PC, tablet, whatever. And so when you write stuff down, your thinking is outside of yourself because it's in the task app, calendar app, planner, 2-in-1, whatever app you want to call it. But then when it comes to planning all of this stuff, it's really interesting to see how Marquez, David, and Andrew actually look at their calendars.
I think it's not crazy to say your calendar can just be the place for all of this stuff. And I know a lot of people who use like all day events as their task list. To me, just the visual clutter of that gives me itchy feelings.
This is a question I was going to ask. I'm like, my calendar feels pretty intense sometimes, but is it I'd like to see how both of you look at your calendar because
I use weekly.
You use weekly?
Same.
Now I don't know. I think
Even on mobile, do you use weekly?
Well, I can't fit enough. I think it's 5 days.
Okay. I have a list. Like I just do the pure like schedule list on
because the list goes too long. Like my widget is the list, but a lot of times the list goes off of like this is 1 day, so I can't.
Yeah.
Can I see?
It doesn't work. Mobile
Because I'm realizing how I look at mine, and I do not think it's the right way of doing it.
like that. This is 7 days.
Oh, do you have yours as the single day?
The month.
Those are all day events, right?
No, these are all work events. So these are all the ones we put in. But it's just the month. So like it's very little.
So
and
I use that occasionally because it's nice to sort of pull out and be like, okay, what free days do I have this month or whatever. But as a general way to sort of manage my days, that just feels
it's hard. And then like getting into it, then it gets a little more confused. I guess that's not too bad.
Now, first I want to say I don't think there's a wrong way to do this. I just think there's different ways to do it for different purposes. But I think it also depends on how granular you want to get and what device you're on as well, because they were talking about the mobile, but when you're on your computer, I would think that you're going to look at the calendar or the task app or the 2-in-1 differently. When I'm looking at my phone, you can see I've got a widget on my main front screen. I have 2 screens. I have the Google Calendar on my right, which is the month view, but this is my calendar, so my main events calendar, my dad's, my sister's, my mum's, and then other Google Calendars I subscribe to. So these are like main events for planning big things such as holidays or anything like that. And then my actual like day-to-day planning, you can see, is this widget. At the top, I have, as David mentioned, all-day events, but these are tasks because I'm using Morgen. It's a 2-in-1 app, when the task is complete, it disappears, and the all-day events are projects. So they're all the different projects I'm doing. Then I get down to the actual day. So you can see I'm currently recording the Marquez Productivity app. And as I scroll down, you can see other things I'm doing. So that's how I can see my day with tasks, my project, and then the sort of bigger, higher level view of the month on my phone. Now, I do recognize I've also brought in projects in there as well, which will relate to the question I have for my case towards the end of this video. But this for me is where, again, it comes down to the showing and the hiding of different events at different times, whether you want to see all the scheduled or all of one certain calendar. So in my month view, I only show my events calendar. In the Morgen, you saw the different colors. They are different calendars for different things. So different YouTube channels, my website, they're all different areas. And if I want to hide or show them, I can. So it's the flexibility of showing what I want, and tasks lets me do that for whether I've completed something or I haven't. But when we start considering all of these different features and flexibilities, we can overcomplicate the system, which they do discuss.
The mistake I make too often is I watch all those videos and I read all the things, and I end up spending all of this time creating this beautiful, elaborate system where everything is in its right place and everything is perfect, and then I've made it way too much work for myself to actually do anything.
Yeah.
So then I go find something else that doesn't have any of that going for me, and it's just a list of stuff. And it turns out that's what I actually need.
Yeah.
So just start with the list of stuff.
Do either of you find yourself not getting to your to-do things because you're too busy putting them on your
That's why it's a
your
toxic
apps
trait.
and change it? Like, yeah.
constantly.
So you're literally setting up what you need to do for the day where you're like, I want to do it in this new app. And then the day's over and you're like, I didn't do any of the things.
Unfortunately, that has happened.
We are
But I
definitely
moved
okay.
all the tasks around.
But it looks real pretty.
Yeah.
Now, I can relate heavily with that, but I never fall into that trap, or I haven't done over the last 3+ years, because I'm using Morgen. So Morgen is where all my tasks go. My events are in my Google Calendar. So when I try a new app, the new app just shows my calendar. And if I add a task in that whatever app it is, it will just stay in the app, but I don't rely on it to do anything for me. I still use Morgen. I just look at the app, explore the app, and go, oh yeah, that's cool, that's nice, I like this feature, and then I just ask Morgen developers and like put a request in, like feature request, can we have this please, and then see if other people want it as well. But for me, this then comes back to the features of some apps. You can look at apps and go, oh look, you can do subtasks and subtasks and folders and subfolders and lists and sublists. I really don't want all of that. I just want a way to see all of my tasks, the date, and maybe some sort of categorization. So in Morgen, I have a task list. I can see whether it's in my main channel or my other channel, or whether it's a website thing or something else. And the calendar also does that for me. So I have essentially 2 different ways to do this, but I don't need to use either of them. And when it comes to using other apps, unless the apps all integrate together into one place, a lot of the time you go backwards and forwards between things. So in the past, I used Notion for tasks and then Google Calendar. This is before Cron turned into Notion Calendar. And I was going into Notion and Google Calendar. I was making tasks or making events in Google Calendar that replicated the Notion task, which was just a pain. Morgen solved that because I had them both in the same place. And I do have things I want to do inside of my Obsidian, which is my note-taking app, but they aren't tasks I've got to get done. They're just things part of writing. So ideas of topics I want to talk about, which doesn't need to be in my task app, because I know if I'm writing about the thing, I'll find it in the script. And this is where I agree with their recommendation for Andrew to just use Google Tasks. Google Tasks, even though it doesn't have all the features that other apps do, it's simple, it works, and it's just a list of things you've got to get done. And they do start talking about Google Assist or Google Assistant and adding tasks in via voice when you're in the car or whatever.
You only get them when it's impossible.
That was my other thing. What is the easiest way to set a reminder for something when I am half asleep in bed?
In the shower, or like away from all of your tech and you need to write something down.
Yeah.
That's if I had
Google
the answer,
Assistant sounds like the best.
I think Assistant's the right answer.
and it throws it into Keep, you're saying? Or
It'll throw it into Google Tasks.
Google Tasks.
yeah, if you ask it to remind you to do something, it's going to make a task, which will actually give it a date and everything, which is cool. But that's the thing, is I don't use Google Tasks, so I don't get to take advantage of that frictionless experience.
Now, there are a couple of things that are interesting here. One, that they say Google Assistant is the solution to quick capturing ideas, but they don't use it themselves, which I find interesting because Todoist obviously links with Google Assistant, and I believe TickTick does as well, which are the two apps that David and Marquez are talking about. But for me, if you've got your phone with you most of the time, which most people do, why not just quickly add something in your app wherever it is? I mean, if you've got a widget, you can just click it and add it in that way. And when it comes to Morgen, that's what I do. The Morgen mobile app isn't great. Sorry, Morgen, it's not great. It does what it needs to do. It's a skeleton app, and you can add things in. That's about it. It's Morgen's mainly a desktop-focused app, but I can do what I need to do. And something I also play with, because Morgen allows you to integrate other task apps, I can actually leverage Google Assistant, because I can talk to my phone and add a task to Google Tasks, and my Google Tasks go into Morgen. This is on the paid plan, but it can go into Morgen. The only downside really for this is you can't have the time in there because it brings a due date, but again, that's another feature request. So you see I've got my Morgen up on the right hand side. You've got integrations with ClickUp, Notion, Todoist. This is my Morgen task. These are all the Morgen tasks that I'm normally working with. But if I go to Google Tasks and say, hey Google, remind me to do something tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Now, as I mentioned, Morgen doesn't bring in the time, but you can see do something, and that's for tomorrow. So then I can drag it in. So if I go over to tomorrow, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. I can drag it in and say, yeah, let's do something tomorrow. And you can see now inside of Morgen, I've got the calendar there because I've scheduled it for tomorrow. And if I actually want to do that at multiple different times, I can have multiple sessions because that's what Morgen lets me do, which I can expand on in a minute. And if I tick that off, and then because I've added 2 sessions, I'll probably need to tick both off because you can see it's still showing. And then I tick that one off, and it will stay there because I've added multiple sessions. So maybe I'm not done with it. So you can see if I hover over all sessions in the past is completed, but I have actually done this, so I'm going to say yes, I'm done, and it will tick it off in Google Tasks. The same with Notion, same with Todoist. But it means that if I do have an idea while I'm driving, I can talk to Google, add it in Google Tasks, and it goes into Morgen automatically. I don't have to worry about it, and it will show in the today list, which is what, as Marquez talks about, is what he looks at.
I think my number one tip for myself is I give everything a date. Everything gets a date, so I don't have to check anything. I just will always get, and whenever I open the new app, I just look at what's today, and I'll just go through today. And if I finish today, I'll look at tomorrow. But I always just have, everything always gets a date. So if there's recurring tasks, like I have maintenance tasks for appliances and stuff, it always gets a date. Is yours always the date it has to be done, or the date it has to be done by? Or like the date you feel like doing it, or the date it has to be done by? Everything always has a date that I have to do it. Okay. So you're not a get this done by Friday. You're like on Monday, you're like, I am calling the dishwasher repairman on Wednesday. I never set deadlines. I always set dates to do things based on if there is something where like you're saying I have to do something by Friday. Yeah. Before I even write it down, I think how long is that going to take me to do? I'm going to write the date down of when I need to do it to get it done by that time. Okay. And so it'll show. So if I need to make a call, that's a 1-day thing. But if it's a project, then I'll write down a Monday task.
I feel like this is a level of life planning Andrew is not comfortable with.
No, I was just thinking I am, and like how I said I worked before, I need this done by Friday. Right. So like when I hit the area and it needs to just like be like, hey, this is coming up. And then when I get to that point of less hecticness of like being productive, it's like, okay, I do that and I tap it off and Friday now, it's done. Yeah. Wow, I can have things done before the day they need to be done by.
This brings back the debate about due dates, schedule dates, deadlines, whatever you want to call them. And there are essentially 2 different types of dates here. You have the date where it's due, i.e. the deadline, the due date of the thing, but then when you schedule to actually do it. Now with Marquez, he's saying he looks at his today list. Now I assume the today list is based on the due date or the scheduled date of when they're going to do things, which would be the calendar. Like today it's been scheduled for today, so I'm going to do it. But what about the things that are due? How does he separate the things that are due that day and also the things he's going to do that day? I imagine it's all on the same list, which for me is a bit cluttered. Now, if I go back to my Morgen, that was a hotkey, Alt-C, it's global hotkey. You can see in the left side today, even though it's expanded, it's completely done. So I don't have anything due today, as in I don't have anything that's deadline today, but I've got loads of things that if I go back to today, I've got loads of things scheduled for today. So I've got my list of things to do scheduled in, but the due things are finished, they're done. So if I go down to the upcoming list, if I click on this task, you can see the due date is the 29th, so that's in 2 days, it's Friday. But then if I hover over, you can see I've got multiple sessions scheduled to do it. I make this bigger and go to the week view. So if we take this teacher assault article, you can see by the calendars, there's multiple sessions. There's one, there's another one. So these are 2 different scheduled times to do the thing, but the due date, you can see, is 29th, which is Friday. So they're the 2 different types of dates managed in Morgen, and the list on the side shows the due date, but the calendar shows the scheduled date. And Marquez mentions how long he thinks something's going to take when it comes to a project. You can see up here, I have my projects as all-day tasks or all-day events. They're tasks in Morgen, and they span however long I think it's going to last. So this, I think, is going to take a few days to write. So the teacher assault is at the top. When I double-click, you can see it's in the website calendar. It's in the website task list. So when I scroll down in my left sidebar, I've got the website task list. You can close them and open them, but when I left click on the task, you can see estimate 2 hours. So I know I want to spend about 2 hours doing something on the thing. So when I drag it into the calendar, it's automatically going to make a 2-hour slot. Do some stuff here. This is that class, that session time that I bring into my calendar, but I don't want to do it then, so I'm going to unschedule. And I've spoken more about how I manage my calendar and tasks and stuff in a previous video, which I'll leave up there. But Marquez, this is the question I have. You've got the tasks in TickTick, but then you also have your events in Google Calendar. I assume you've got TickTick and Google Calendar linked up, but you're not using Google Calendar. You're using Notion Calendar, but then you're also using Notion for the business. I assume there are projects and tasks in Notion. So if you've got the business stuff in Notion and the personal stuff in TickTick, are you going to 2 different places? Do you have them both on your phone? How do you know which task is yours, which task isn't yours? Are you filtering out a list? Are you looking at the Notion calendar in a filtered view? Like, I don't understand how that's working. So maybe you could share the behind the scenes or the linking between those different apps, because you mentioned to try and keep the system simple, but having Notion as a place for tasks and projects, but then also TickTick for a place of tasks and projects, with the Google Calendar sort of in the middle as the mediator or bringing things together. I'd like to know sort of how that all works. Maybe in the unscheduled check-in video that you mentioned, David coming in to checking on Andrew to see how he's doing, you could mention more about how you integrate either your Notion tasks, your Notion projects with your own TickTick or Google Calendar or Notion Calendar, Cron, or how you manage those different things, because to me, that's 2 different places for tasks, 1 place for projects, but how do you get the business projects into your personal task manager? Or do you not use your personal task manager for your business stuff? Like, that interests me. Maybe it doesn't interest other people, but it does me. And I think right at the crux of this is Notion Calendar not doing tasks well, because Notion Calendar is a calendar app. Morgen, as I've mentioned in a previous video, does the Notion integration to a calendar better because you can actually turn them into tasks. Obviously, that's my opinion. I'm biased, but how do you deal with tasks in your Notion calendar?